My name is Robert Axelsen, and this is going to be a talk about Vue.js. 2 disclaimers. I'm trying to keep it short and brief. I know we have some beginners here that maybe has more than enough learning JavaScript for now, and then we have some more advanced people. I'll keep it more beginner-friendly than advanced. I'll try to cover some of the things that makes Vue.js Vue.js. I won't go so much in depth, but we'll look at some examples together. The other disclaimer is I'm on a Mac. That is not mine, so if I seem like I'm fumbling around, that's why. But I think we'll make this work. Cool, let's get started. Just really briefly about me. I'm a software developer, meetup organizer of this FreeCodeCamp meetup, and also Vue.js Vienna, and also Vienna Go, which is a Golang meetup. So I organize 3 meetups. They're all monthly. And obviously, I'm a community youth. I'm a community enthusiast because I really love doing these kind of things. You can find me on most of the things at Rob Axelsen, Twitter, GitHub, etc. Me and Daniel Deutsch, which is my co-organizer for FreeCodeCamp Vienna, which is also here tonight. We had a talk together recently, which you can see online. Head over to my website and you can see it in full. It talks about our way from being a self-taught programmer to getting our first developer job. So that's enough about me. What is Vue.js? A brief history. Vue.js was created by Evan You in 2013 while he worked at Google. Just to give some context, the first release of React was also released in 2013. They worked on it internally at Facebook before, but that gives us some context. Here's a quote from Evan You. I started Vue as a personal project when I was working at Google Creative Labs in 2013. My job there involved building a lot of UI prototypes. After hand-rolling many of them with vanilla.js and using Angular 1 for a few, I wanted something that captured the declarative nature of Angular's data binding, but with a simpler, more approachable API. And that is how Vue started. I know this is hard for you guys here in the audience to see, but I can sum it up really briefly with the popularity. This chart is supposed to show that November this year was the first month that was more than 1 million downloads of Vue.js. Last year, I think October 2016, I'm not 100% sure, they had reached their first, I think it was 2 million downloads total. So now we're up to, instead of total, we're up to monthly downloads. And it's just increasing in popularity. Also, comparably to other frameworks, it has a good growth rate. It's not necessarily the only reason, or it's not the only reason you should use Vue.js, but it's one of the things to keep in mind. This size here is wrong, but here are some of the benefits. It is now 20 kilobytes minified and zipped, the size of this framework. So it's quite light compared to some other frameworks. We didn't cover it, but just cover it now. Vue.js is a framework. It's not a library. Some people have in the past and continue to call it a library, but it has stuff that makes it more a framework with a lot of features. When it comes to the feature-rich part, there's a big API with a lot of stuff you can do out of the box with Vue.js or with build tools like Webpack on top. Compared to both React and Angular, it has a gentler learning curve. That doesn't mean it is purely gentle. It's more like it doesn't have as steep of a learning curve. Some other frameworks might have a steeper one. Just starting out, it will still be, some stuff to learn, and it could be a steep-ish learning curve if it's your first framework. Keep that in mind. The documentation is great. We'll have a look at that afterwards, so we'll get to that. It is reactive. We'll get to that in the next slide. It also has declarative rendering, and it does have two-way data binding, but that's more of a default nowadays. Like, it's not necessarily something we have to mention, but if you're curious, that's built in. I think I'll skip back and just mention one thing that is not in the slides. For those of you who, for now, either haven't used any JavaScript or haven't really programmed much, or you've done something in JavaScript, and what you've done is using JavaScript, so vanilla JavaScript or JavaScript itself with document, get element by ID and stuff, and manipulating the HTML DOM with JavaScript. The reason you would want to use Vue.js is to, instead of having to do all of that kind of basic stuff and structuring it out yourself, you can use Vue.js out of the box. As well, you kind of get a bit ahead of the curve in terms of people have already prepared stuff for you that they've simplified, so you as a developer can get more done quicker, but it is more higher level. You won't necessarily understand everything that goes on behind the scenes, but it's not necessarily a bad thing starting out. Keep in mind that it might be good to look into the things as you start working with them. How does this really happen with the JavaScript itself? And you're free to read the source code because it's open source. I just want to get that out of the box. Feel free to ask questions afterwards if this is really Greek to you, what we're getting into now. But if you want to start out, don't be afraid to skip ahead and try out Vue.js if you're not so familiar with JavaScript, because you still can get stuff done looking at the documentation at Vue.js.org. So just briefly, the reactive part that you might have seen that also React has, as it also has in its name, is the fact that it reacts to changes in state. And let's get to some fundamentals before we talk about what makes it reactive. Vue.js has a virtual DOM, and it is a simplified copy of the HTML DOM. But what is a DOM? DOM is the document object. Yeah, I was about to say module, but then I second-guessed myself. Thank you, guys. It's a document object model, which is an abstraction of what the browser is keeping track of to render what you see in the browser, in a simplified way of saying it. Vue.js has its own virtual DOM, which is even more simplified, which is its way of keeping track of what it's going to hook into in the browser. What makes it reactive then is that it's when you make changes to the state in your app, only the affected parts of the page changes. And it does this by diffing. So it takes, you make a change in the state, and it diffs the change with what is in the virtual DOM, and it intelligently only changes on the page what it needs to change instead of having to re-render the whole page. So sometimes you click a button or you do something on a web page. If the whole thing refreshes for you to see something, it's not doing this. So there is some magic going on in the back end, and that's what the reactive part is about. And it acts on when you make changes to the state. The state is as simple as data or stuff. For example, you have a unique title for each page. You want to input your username, like stuff that is unique to you browsing this site. Let's call this state. This is what we are calling state, for example. When you're changing the username, when you're changing the title, when you are clicking a button and the color of something changes, that is a state that's keeping track of. And when you're then changing the state, it reflects into this reactiveness. These are simplified ways of saying it, and I'm trying to keep that in mind. Declarative rendering means that basically comes down to it looks more like HTML, and it's easier to write and read. We declare how something should look like with HTML and Vue.js specific syntax, and then Vue.js takes care of the rest for us. The end result is, as I said, easier and more readable code. And we'll look at this in the documentation soon. The two-way data binding means that when properties in the model gets updated, so does the UI. When UI elements get updated, the changes get propagated back to the model. So if we, for example, have a text in our page, and then we have the same text and input field, if those are bind together with two-way binding, if we're changing what is in the input field, the title changes instantly. And again, with the reactive rendering, without the whole page refreshing for us. We'll have a look at that also. Now we'll get to some code. I'll use the official documentation as the basis. That also makes it easier for you guys to look at it afterwards yourself and continue on if you want to. Before we get to that, just very briefly, I work at Zipwise. We are hiring. This is where you go if you're interested. Right now, we're looking for a full-stack web developer among other developer jobs. If you feel like the qualifications are beyond you, please just approach me or still apply, because we'd like to get to know you better regardless. That's it. We don't need to spend more time on that. So, instead of demo time, this time I want to call it JSFiddle time, because we can get quicker to testing something out and see the results together. And we have something saved for afterwards, but let us do this like so. This is the official Vue.js website. If we click Get Started here, we get here. It's as simple as that. It's the guide. This is Vue.js 2, by the way. If we talk about major releases, that's what where we are at now. But there hasn't been Angular size breaking changes, so don't worry like that. The fiddle that I talked about is the link that is mentioned here. So I think we'll just have a look at that. Let's get back to that in a second. Because all these things that I mentioned now are explained well here in the documentation. Declarative rendering is an example of it here. You see, if you know some HTML from before, this is HTML with something here inside that we are like, okay, what is this? Well, let's have a look. This is a Vue instance. This is where the magic happens. Okay, so we got that out of the box, we got that ready. This is the same thing in the browser. You could do this locally, just remember to use the CDN like this one to get Vue.js imported, or you can download and have it locally. If that's Greek to you, ask me afterwards. Or read the documentation. It's not so hard to set up. Here is the output. So this is as if this was the web page that we have created with these, with HTML together with JavaScript. We are now importing the whole Vue.js here. We are declaring this. The ID app is, we need to declare an ID, and we need to tell Vue where it should start to do its magic. You do not have to use Vue.js on your whole website. And on a single page on your website, you don't have to use Vue.js only. You can use it just on a small part. For example, GitLab, they are using components where they are incrementally doing more and more of Vue.js for their website. So they're having this approach where you don't have to think about it as we have to switch everything right now to Vue.js. You can do it iteratively or, step by step. So what is this? This is a reference to the state, to the data that we are declaring here. This is a simple Vue instance where we are declaring the element that we're supposed to render this Vue instance within, so the HTML element. We are declaring only here the data, and then magically, with this syntax, we know with mustache braces or double curly braces, we know to reference that, and we're outputting it this way. It's that simple. This is more an example of declarative rendering. Let's get a little bit more into other types of things we can do. Let's take this example here. Let's do something fun here, by the way. It is as simple as, okay, German keyboard. 1 second. There we go. Woohoo. So if I now, and this is JavaScript, if I now just say I want to have this text, maybe. Awesome, cool, nice. FreeCodeCamp. Maybe I shouldn't write so much. Awesome. So I can now do this, right? What should come here? Awesome. And I can manipulate this as well, and I can say, I shouldn't do this, it seems. I think there is a plus. Awesome. If I just have a look at what is spelled on the buttons, it seems to work, sort of. Cool. So we can even do stuff within the curly braces to get even more fancy. Now we can see an example of conditionals and loops. If you don't know much about programming, this might be confusing, but for those of you guys who know some, this is really handy. This is sort of like the Angular style of doing things. Now I'm only going to take this, but we're still doing the same. And then we need a button or something. Now you see me. Okay, let's just do it. That's what they're doing. So this follows the state of the scene object, which has a key value. The key is seen and the value is true. So it's saying that if the value of seen is true, show it. But if it's false, don't show it. That's a conditional on that level of VIF, and that's a control statement. But we can go into loops and have a for loop within our div. And then we can take the state, which is a list. So we could just say awesome. Not awesome. Okay, then I should just probably pop that back in. Great. Awesome. So let's just create a list of to-dos. And then we should have should be an array. Okay, I'm going to copy paste because this keyboard is not my friend. But you get the idea. So let's push this in. So this is now an object where we have one array of objects, and then we're going to show, hopefully, all of them. Something wrong in my copy pasting. Yeah. Awesome. So we just had we changed this initially, so it didn't know where to render. So now we have a list here, and depending on then data, we're saying to do in to do. So to do's is the object that we're iterating over, and then we're the same way that you're mapping over stuff, your for each or whatever, however you're handling your for loops in JavaScript. You're saying that this is the item within that object, and then you're iterating over that, and then you're rendering out it like this, for example. You can also do stuff like this. Then we can do an unordered list. And then we can say we want index. And then we can even do... Okay, let me just copy paste this. Awesome. Awesome. So it was the wrong other way around. But you can even work with indexes. You can even have num and numbers and stuff like this. But let's look at something. Let's look at two-way data binding. And then it's about time to mention something of where you can go next as a user if you want to look into more, because this is Vue.js at its core, what we are looking at now, the syntax and the Vue.js instance. When you're getting more advanced, you'll use Babpack or something, and you'll have a .vue file to render it in single file components, and then it starts being more like the other frameworks out there. It's a bit too much to cover in this talk, but let's have a look now at two-way data binding and some magic happening here. Awesome. Oh, actually, we took the wrong example. We can look at this though. This reverses it for us. The magic happens. This is a, I didn't mean to cover this, but this is an event handler with the click. And then we're invoking the reverse message function, and it takes the message and it reverses it for us. And because this is reactive, the state changes, and then the view changes. But this is more fun to play with. We'll take this code here, and we'll do this. Then we'll take this data, so we basically just need to change the data, right? We could keep it, but let's do, what did I copy paste? Cool. Let's do like so. There's something wrong here, right? Let me take a step back then. No, it looks good. Awesome. So this is what we're saying when we have two-way data binding. Whatever I'm writing here, because the state is bound both to the message and we're binding the vModel of the input message to the title that we are displaying or the message we are displaying in the p tag, it now changes instantly as we're doing stuff on it. I think this is a good time to round up by saying that to take this to the next level, let's have a look at example first. No, let's do it like this. Simple. Awesome. Components that I briefly mentioned, I will look at a quick example and then we'll round up, is a system, it's an abstraction that allows us to build large-scale application composed of small, self-contained, and often reusable components. In Vue, a component is essentially a Vue instance with predefined options. In a large application, it is necessary to divide the whole app into components to make development manageable. There is a great tool, if you just look for Vue CLI, it's maintained by the Vue.js core team, that does this stuff for you. It's literally install something with npm, run a command, go into the directory, and just npm run dev, for example. Spins up it for you with Webpack, and you can have a look at the code and it live. Let's have a look at an example of what that means. Not the Vue CLI, but here's an example of how we are taking stuff to the next level. It's a bit more stuff going on in one file, but you can have one file for each component. You can have components within components, and you can easily build up a single page application. You can even do server-side rendering with Vue.js, and then you can put this into production and do stuff. But don't be afraid to start out small and have hobby project with the plain Vue.js instances, but this is how you would do something bigger as a hobby, or you would go to production if you're doing this professionally. It renders on top inside a template. Template tag is HTML specific. We are rendering it this way. The script is the Vue.js instance that we just saw an example of, and then we're keeping a style tag below here. We can also use Sass or Stylus or whatever in there. And then this together with the Webpack build environment will then render this into what you need to put on your hosting or whatever, or locally to see the resulting Vue.js in action. Yeah, that's about it. Hope you had a better feel for what Vue.js is. I knew there was a lot in a short time and only some examples. I would encourage you to just simply go to the webpage, have a look at the examples. There's tons of courses out there as well. I can recommend some both free and paid ones, and play with it. And feel free to ping me if you have any questions along the way. Yeah, thank you.